Okay, we're all coming in now. Lovely to see you. Welcome everybody. Hi, most of you, a lot of you know, my name's Terry. I'm going to be your host for tonight, and welcome to this webinar on transforming workplaces, how HR can lead with the IDGs, the inner development goals, and transpersonal psychology. So welcome to this webinar, and welcome Zoe, our guest speaker for this evening. So I'll introduce the webinar, to a little bit about it, and also introduce Zoe. But before we do, let's just spend a little bit of time arriving here, because I suspect we've all had some busy days, and also different things on our minds and all of that. So let's spend some time actually just being with each other. So what I suggest we do is just look around the room here, look around the Zoom room, and give each other some eye contact. So pick a person, go eye to eye, and give them a big smile. Yeah. Just like we would be in a conference room, perhaps, and you meet somebody and you look at them and smile. Now, because there's quite a few of us here, we don't know who's looking at who. We might not get a smile back. That's okay. Just give it as a gift. And then coincidentally, we might do eye contact with the same person at the same time and give each other a smile. So let's do that just for a couple of minutes. Off we go. Okay. Lovely. Thank you, everyone. And now just give everyone a big smile, all smile at the same time. Everyone a big group smile, a collective smile. Lovely. Great. Thank you. So thank you for that. Welcome and welcome everybody. Um, I think this webinar really goes to the heart of the purpose of the Transforming Organizations Hub. Um, and that's because it's really looking at how can we use um, the IDGs, development goals, and transpersonal psychology to create organizational transformation, to facilitate it. So it's at the heart of what we're talking about here. How does inner development enable the transformation of organizations? And I know we'll be speaking to Zoe, she's going to be sharing her experience of leading change within organizations. So it's going to be very practical. And also, as well, which I think is extremely valuable, is that Zoe is going to be bringing a perspective from the HR profession on inner development goals. Now, we may not agree with that perspective, but this is a safe space where we can explore different perspectives. Yeah. But what that means is if we disagree, it's not so much about trying to prove ourselves right and the other person wrong, knocking down people's arguments. It's really what we want to do is engage in dialogue where we use the energy of difference to create something new. Perhaps that something new transcends our differences or unites them. So we're looking to really encourage some dialogue if there is any difference of opinions and different views. But this is a safe space to explore those different views. So we're going to be having a bit of dialogue as we go through, generative dialogue. So halfway through, Zoe's going to take a break for 10 to 15 minutes to take questions and contributions. And then at the end as well, we want to allow a good chunk of time, perhaps 20 minutes, half an hour, see how we go for dialogue and conversation. Okay. Yeah, everyone's right, but only partially. Yeah, I think that's we've all got a partial grip on the truth, as it were. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, so I'll introduce Zoe and then hand you over to her. So Zoe Walters is a global transformational human resource executive who empowers individuals and businesses to thrive. Her career has spanned many business leadership roles, including Chief People Officer at the leading media giant Condé Nast International, um, where she led a $2 billion global digital transformation project. And she's been a global HR executive at the renowned sports leader Adidas, leading a $4 billion digital brand, commerce, and people strategy. She's also consulted for many Fortune 500 companies, and she has created and advised and transformed businesses and led and coached several teams to high performance success. So welcome, Zoe. Over to you. The floor's yours.
Wow, who are you just talking about, Terry? Who is that? I'm like, well, I'm just an ordinary human, and I've had a bit of a trajectory on the HR world, but thanks so much for that kind introduction. And whilst I'm loading up the my presentation, I'd love to know, and I know a couple of you have already put something in the chat, where are you dialing in from, so your locality, and what's your expertise? Because I'm not assuming that people watching here and on replay will be from HR. You'll have a level of expertise. Maybe you're from IDGs, maybe you are a psychologist, or whatever your expertise is. We're all inclusive here, so I know that I'm coming from a particular strand of HR, but it would be great to know where you're. Oh, yep. Hello, Wendy. Greetings from South Africa. Hello. And that's brilliant. And Hertfordshire, brilliant. I'm in Cambridgeshire also. That's Marcia. Hello, Marcia. I know Marcia well. Yeah, it would be just great to know, because that I might, for me, obviously I have a script that I'm going to follow in terms of what I'm delivering today, but to land it well and to make it resonant for the audience, it's always good to know where people are and what you do. So brilliant. Got CFO in the house, so you probably know a little bit about corporate and HR. Hi Ray, how you doing? Nice to see you. Brilliant. Yep, you're a change catalyst. Absolutely. New York City, Wally, fantastic. You're in non-profit and healthcare, fantastic. So some of you will resonate with what I'm going to bring in terms of business acumen, and obviously people watching on replay may come from all various backgrounds. Kent, brilliant, lovely, hi. And I will say that maybe forgiveness on my part, I'm coming very specifically from the lens of HR, and I'm going to talk in language that HR and business people may resonate with, and it might not be academic, it might be a bit unorthodox in moments, but I ask that we all kind of like be inclusive, and there is Q&A because I'd love to know a bit more about you and what you're dealing with. And so hello from London. Right, obviously, let me start sharing my desktop here. Give me a moment. And lovely, I just did a little test. And do you think I can find it? Nope, there we go. But hopefully you are seeing. Can you give me a nod if you can see front? Yeah. Can you see? Great, brilliant. So before we get started, I will just tell you that I've got two screens here. So you're not going to be looking at me as I'm probably talking. I'm going to be leading you through a deck. But if I do look over to the right, it's simply because I've got two screens going on. So Terry's my timekeeper. Going to keep me on time, Terry, and make sure that you can interrupt me if something's not working. I tend to speak quite fast. So if you can see that I've got sticky notes all around me saying, talk slowly, Zoe, talk slowly. So yeah, it's a privilege to be here. So thank you to Jessica and Terry for letting me be here and talk to you. And my intention is simply to create powerful dialogue and be a massive bridge between human resources and IDGs and transpersonal psychology. So let me tell you what I'm going to talk to you about, because I think it's important that I give you a point of reference. As I said, I'm coming from a HR perspective, so we've got some things in here that I'm going to be talking about, specifically about workplace megatrends. I'm going to talk in separation, and they may feel quite disconnected when I talk about them. Transpersonal psychology, inner development goals known as IDGs, Theory U as a change frame, and then I'm going to present a case study and talk about practical application. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a triangle. So Aleph Trust is what I associate with transpersonal psychology. Why? Because my studies with them as a master's in transpersonal psychology and consciousness, inner development goals, and Theory U. That's going to be the main topic today. So my only intention is to bridge these 3 points so that you can understand how I've applied them and how they've worked in practice. So again, it's very great to come from an academic background for me, but to land in the business, I have to talk business talk to them in the way that they understand and they know. So let's get started, shall we? So in the workplace, let's go broad strokes. So I'm going to go macro to micro, because what I'm talking about is a historical journey. I didn't create the journey, but you can see in front of you what we've got is a historical timeline, industrial revolution. In 1700s, we had the emergence of mechanical and production, revolutionized our workplace. We then had the 1800s, which is the mass production, mass labor. Again, transformed our workplaces, more people in a workplace than we ever have. Then we had 2000s, the birth of technology, the World Wide Web as we knew it. Who remembers the dial-up? I certainly do. And then the 2020s, which we're halfway through, is the emergence of AI and technical acceleration. I'd say it's exponential at this moment in time. So having all said of that, with this technical advances, and we're very laser focused on this at the moment, and certainly I am in helping HR integrate AI into the workplace, we've seen automation impact job roles massively. It's not going to stop. And we're only on the very first wave of the innovation curve, right? We've got a long way to go yet. But that has an impact on our people and our planet. And this impact can be seen in multiple ways, from a physical perspective, a mental perspective, a social perspective, an environmental perspective, and. But there's one thing that's really clear, is that evolution is happening and it's inevitable and it's not going to stop. And AI and tech are absolutely accelerating these changes. So what does that really mean? So remember I said I'm going to go macro to micro. So I'm going to take a little bit of a sidestep for a second and talk about the UK only, right? So the UK has a growing and aging population that could probably suit the rest of the world. In the UK, we've got 33 million plus workers. We spend about a third of our life in work. We've got generational spans that are the biggest we've ever, 5 in the workplace. And health and well-being is under massive threat. So if we talk about now the workplace itself, and organisations typically look to HR to continually pivot, keep the workforce innovative, capability-driven, provide resources for its employees, and continually pivot to meet the growing needs of the business, the consumer, and the employee. And so whose hands is this falling in? Well, if we can take a moment, if you are in the corporate world, you'll know that that's falling into the role of HR. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's where we are. And again, we're not all from HR in the audience nor in replay. But we have many streams in HR that work from talent management, talent acquisition, labour law, rewards, organisational design, learning development, all of those things. Change and transformation typically falls in their lap. Well, it certainly has mine. That's what I'll say. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about me, not from an egotistical perspective, but I want to say that in this time and age where access to information is massive, you can put your hands on anything, fake and non-fake. So you've got to know who you're learning from, and they need to be credible. So I come with a degree in HR management. I've got nearly 3 decades of experience working in HR. No, I'm not that old, showing my age. I'm qualified with the CIPD. I'm a fellow charter. I'm a transpersonal psychologist. I have a master's with the Alif Trust, as I mentioned before. And I've also got a background in applied psychology and human values psychology. I'm a coach, NLP master practitioner, timeline therapist, hypnosis. I've acquired those skills because I've had a thirst and a quest to understand how people think, why they do the things they do, and why they say the things they do, and how they live their lives. I'm just fascinated by it, and I'm sure that you all will have a healthy interest in that as well. And my career has spanned across multiple sectors, and I haven't listed them all out here because it's a bit boring for everyone. But I will say, to Terry's point, I've led 2 very fundamental historical moments for big brands. I started as a coordinator and I left my corporate role as the chief people officer. Very different, fasting roles, but ultimately I've led 2 very big digital and technology-driven transformations. And that has come with failure and success in equal measure, and learning on the route. And now today, what I'm doing is helping businesses thrive through the lens of HR and AI. So that's where I'm going to be spending a lot of time in getting to grips, because we've got a literacy gap. But anyway, I digress. I'm not an expert in the development goals, nor do I know everything about transpersonal psychology. but I do know a thing or two about HR, or I'd like to think. I can be challenged on that, of course, helpfully. So I want to talk about the future of work. So now you know who you're learning from, we've set the stage with the historical kind of evolution. We can only really ever predict the future by what? The past. But we had this big pandemic that worked in the middle. So has that disrupted us somewhat? Well, there's a lot of literature out there that PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, are a professional service company. It's got about 350,000 employees around the world, huge organization. And they absolutely master the transformation in organizations. And there is this, and the deck that you'll get, I believe that you'll all get this, the sources in here to look at this article is fascinating and very in depth in equal measure. But they talk about a prediction of this future of work. And they talk about four distinct work worlds that we're going towards for 2030. And bearing in mind, we're not so far off of that. We're halfway through the 2020s. And these worlds do not necessarily integrate, but separate. And so these four worlds, these megatrends, they call them, provide context for what our future worlds might look like when it comes to the workplace. And they don't dictate their shape or features at a specific point in time, but they do show how humans respond to challenges and opportunities which these particular megatrends will determine the worlds in which the future of work plays out. So you can read on the screen here what these particular definitions are. I'm just going to whiz through them, top left, and I'm going to go around in clockwise position. So the yellow world, and I think some of us will have a natural gravitation towards one of these worlds where we see ourselves more in, or you see companies that embody these attributes. So we start at the yellow world. This is the world where humans come first. It's focused on fairness, social good, ethical leadership, and meaningful work. So yeah, humanness, highly valued. The red world is where innovation rules. And this is the speed, the pace, rapid innovation is taking front and center stage. This is disruption at its most disruptive and where regulation struggles to keep up. And this is where those with a winning idea will take that center stage. We got the blue world, corporate is king. This is where power, size dominates, scale is everything. And there's a lot of rivalry in power. And then we have the green world, which is companies that care. This is a social world that they take social responsibility, sustainability, and they think that that's key to business success. So what's really interesting is the thing that PwC call out is this separation, not integration. So we can start to see fragmentation, where small is powerful, large businesses lose their dominance. This is about social bubbles and affinity groups taking on new importance. We've got individualism, where me first rules, a focus on individual need and infinite choice to the consumer. Then we've got corporate integration, which big business rules, as I said before, but the biggest have more sway, so they've got more power, more control. And then collectivism is fairness and equality dominance. So this is where the good prevails, personal preference, collective responsibility for the environment, social good and fairness over individual interest. So what does this bring? Well, this brings about, and this is one of the quotes, and I've extracted it from the piece of literature. We're living in a fundamental transformation in the way that we work. Well, we've established that. We know that. Automation, thinking machines, replacing human tasks and jobs. Yep, this is not new news. That this does mean that we've got big challenges on our hands with organisational talent, particularly in the HR world, skill shifts, and we've got risks of people moving jobs, leaving jobs and losing jobs. So there's obviously other factors going on in the world right now, which is economical, political, societal, which are not listed on here, but I think we can all look at those moments and go, yeah, there's impact everywhere. So in light of these worlds, let's say, so what do they mean for the future of work? So we've again set the stage, the history. Now we're going a bit micro into the specific impact on work. Well, it means that we're going to have more technological breakthroughs than ever. There'll be a race. We're going to get faster. That means AI, robotics, automation are going to keep transforming. This means that productivity, efficiency, job disbanding, job displacement, skill shifts, as I said before. Rise of digital platforms, going to be more startups than ever, popping up, going away, whatever it might mean. And the VUCA world, let's talk about volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. This is reinforcing this world that we live in. We're going to have demographic and social change, which means the aging populations we've got, certainly in developed countries, will increase demand for automation and lifelong learning, that younger generations in developing countries or developed countries will reshape global labour market. And it does mean that workplace impact is that employees will need to reskill. That is the main message. And it means that careers may be not linear, and not, are there careers anymore? That's a big question. We've got rapid urbanization. By 2030, 5 billion people will live in cities. So we went away from cities for a while, and it looks as though we're going to come back into cities, and that's going to concentrate economic power. Cities will become key players in innovation and job creation, and the workplace impact. So what does that mean for remote working, hybrid models? In fact, most of my career, what I've done is centralize, decentralize, centralize, decentralize. And in some way, this is exactly what's happening again. And so the final thing this will bring is climate change. There's an awful lot of unrest or uncertainty around what does AI mean and all the technology advances. What does that mean for our planet? Well, there'll be rising energy demands, water shortages potentially. Climate crisis will push businesses beyond towards sustainability. They have no choice but to embrace. And that means that companies can be held accountable for their environmental impact. And we may even see some legislation coming around that. So it's going to be sustainability focused jobs will rise, and businesses will need to embrace that. So that gives us a stark picture of where we might see our workplaces go. Now, this is a lot of ifs and buts, right? And these are trends. This is what we might see. But we can certainly get on the program to say that AI and our technology is already in our worlds. It's here. It's not in 2030. By 2030, we'll have embraced it a lot more. And maybe we'll see these, I call them maybe some polarity in organizations and their behaviors. But who knows? So I take these really seriously because I think, wow, what do I need to do in HR to start this now? I can't wait until 2030. So that's the history lesson done for the second. And I'm going to deep dive into what might be the segments of transpersonal psychology. Then we're going to talk about IDGs and then change models. So they might feel a bit fractious as I go through them and disconnected, but I promise you my job is to bridge all of these points together so that we can see how it all works in practice. So let's talk about transpersonal psychology, shall we? And some of you may know a lot about it. Some of you may know a little bit about it. So for a diverse audience, I'm going to give a brief overview of what transpersonal principles I work with or I have worked with recently in the case study that I'm going to share with you. And those in HR learning may be familiar with Maslow, your hierarchy of needs. Even though it's got a lot of critique, you can all agree that that is still a very big impact on the corporate learning agenda. We can like it or not like it, but it's still very profound in organizational learning. So, and it might be a surprise to know that Abraham Maslow was one of the co-founders, or at least the godfather of transpersonal psychology. So it does mean that humanistic psychology has existed in organizations. It's not woo-woo, it's not something that doesn't exist. It does. It's just been labeled around the hierarchy of needs. So I want to kind of make sure that we bring that into the discussion because, as I said before, language is going to be really important for businesses to get behind. There is no point in me talking from an academic standpoint to businesses that don't understand the language. So that's going to be a really important factor. So Transpersonal psychology integrates humanistic, spiritual, and cognitive psychology with a focus specifically on self-awareness, meaning, and inner connectedness. So the principles that I want to outline, and I've not put them on a slide purposely because it's too many words and I think you would get a little bit lost in it. So I'm just going to talk you through them. So the first one is beyond the ego, an expanded state of consciousness. Transpersonal psychology explores state of consciousness beyond the ordinary waking state. And that may include mystical experiences, it may include meditation, which most of us are now familiar with, and psychedelic states, for example. But the main point is that transpersonal psychology recognizes that the human experience is not limited to the ego or personal self, but extends into higher or altered states of consciousness. The second principle is the integration of science and spirituality. This is one that I'm most fascinated by. In my profession, I started with cognitive psychology because I thought this was the place that would explain human spirit and behavior, and it does to a degree. The missing part for me was the transpersonal aspect. So unlike traditional psychology, which often avoids spiritual topics, transpersonal psychology acknowledges the importance of spirituality as the fundamental aspect of human existence, and it seeks to integrate scientific methods with subjective and what we might say experiential knowledge. The third principle is a holistic view of the self. And what I mean by that is the self is seen as multidimensional, encompassing some dimensions: physical, psychological, spiritual aspects. But growth is not just about mental, it's about self-transcendence, realizing one's own potential, which also links to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The fourth is interconnectedness and unity consciousness. So transpersonal psychology realizes that people often experience a deep need of unity with others, with nature, the cosmos, the universe, whatever you might call it, in transpersonal states. And these experiences can lead to a greater sense of compassion, purpose, and interconnectedness. And the fifth one is transformative and healing potential. Well, transpersonal experiences can lead, and often lead, to profound personal transformation, healing trauma, fostering personal and collective well-being. So practices such as mindfulness, meditation, and breath work, not limited to, are often used therapeutically. And even more, they're becoming in the workplace things that are used as practices to embed in everyday living, and even in schools now, which is, for me, on my opinion, is a very good leap forward. Not quick enough, but it's a leap. So now I'm going to segue into inner development goals. As I said, I am not an expert, and I don't sit in the IDG world in terms of on the research panel or anything to do with them. I was introduced to them through my journey at Aleph Trust, and I began to realise as a framework, this was what was really important to me in HR. So who and what are the inner development goals? If you've never heard of them before, which I'm not going to assume you have or you haven't, the inner development goals are a non-for-profit organisation that are committed to fostering the inner development goals, inner development of people towards more sustainable futures. They research, they collect, and they communicate science-based skills and qualities that help us, you and I, live purposeful, sustainable, and productive lives. And I know that there's a tiny little link down the bottom here, but the innerdevelopmentgoals.org are the place where you should really check them out. They've got a download, what you can use, and they've got a playbook almost, I think it's called that. So what are the inner development goals? They are a framework. Okay, so there's 5 pillars. We're going to dig into those 5 pillars. They're a framework for personal and collective growth in what we might say to drive systemic change. They focus on developing inner capabilities to tackle global challenges, sustainability, leadership, resilience. And they have 5 key dimensions that cultivate conscious leadership, adaptability, and transformation. So why would these be relative to someone like me in HR? Well, it helps me to almost understand and present a framework which is easy to follow in adapting to change, driving and developing leadership skills and improving resilience. Now, it's not a one shoe fits all here, and I can't say that it fits everybody because every company is different and their readiness to embrace new and fresh thinking can be and can vary. But for me, particularly in an organization, in-house in HR, it helps me and leaders in the organization to drive human-centered transformation. So I'm just going to take a quick little glass of water because I'm talking a lot before I go into the pillars. So off we go. So, by the way, the framework is IDGs. The pictures is what I've adopted. I've put the pictures on, so forgive me for using it. It's just how I relate to them and how I use them. So I thought I'd leave them there to show you how I interpret and use the framework. So we've got these 5 pillars, and the first one, left to right, you've got being. So being is about developing inner awareness, relationship with yourself, to self. It's about having integrity. It's about presencing, again, within self, becoming presence with self, and having a learning and open mindset. The second pillar, thinking, cognitive skills. This is about cultivating that critical thinking, complexity awareness, and perspective taking. The third pillar is around relating, caring for others and the world. I love that word appreciation. I can't get enough of it. But it's about enhancing compassion and communication and appreciation of others. Loving kindness comes to mind for me when I think about this particular pillar. And maybe something's arising for you as I talk about these. The fourth pillar is around collaborating, strengthening trust, co-creation, and collective intelligence. And I think trust is underpinned here for me in collaborating. Where trust exists, anything is possible. There's a famous quote that talks about that. And the last one is about acting, driving change, encouraging courage. We must be courageous. We must sometimes step outside our comfort zone for the greater good, something bigger than us. This is about perseverance and sustaining mindset shifts of this paradigm. Now, I put the Maslow hierarchy of needs here, another point to kind of lean over and say, there's some things here that overlap in this model, and I, because of my lens in HR, I think it's really important I always create a bridge for the business to understand and embrace something new that they've never seen before. So familiarity is where I'm coming from. So now I'm going to talk about change management. So I mentioned before that I'm going to talk in isolation about these specific things and then draw them together. So change management is what? Most of us will absolutely know these change models or have heard of them, which is Lewin, Kotter, McKinsey, Nudge Theory, Kubler-Ross, Adker, Kaizen. I pretty much use most of these in my career at some point or another. And they all draw they've all got a different way of doing it, but they're a process. And people aren't a process, but they need to follow a process. So the change models that, in my experience, are focused on the process, and it's usually time bounded. We need to move at the pace and speed that suits the organisation. And people need to get on board with that in order to adopt the change either early on or on time. And I believe that we're kind of missing a big important component here. And this is flawed. So I'm looking at this thinking, how can I help the organisation move through a transformation at the pace and speed? Because you can't let people sit in that VUCA well too long. It's very destructive, and everybody gets disrupted by that change. Customers, employees, vendors, everybody. So there is a need to move through systematically and time bounded, which is where I believe this next model helps us. If you've ever heard of Theory U by Otto Scharmer, this is a roadmap for human-centered transformation. I'm going to talk you through it because you can clearly see there's a curve here. That's the U. But I believe that this is a fresh approach to navigating change. This does not replace the models I just showed you, mind you. This is to sit alongside them. And when we look at Otto Scharmer's Theory U model, It's a framework for leading profound change and shifting from reactive to generative leadership, and to cultivate and emphasize awareness, deep listening, and co-creation to drive transformation. We can already see there's an overlap with the IDGs. So we've already got some threads here around awareness, listening, co-creation, and driving. So we've already got some synergies here. But let's go through them one by one. I'm not going to focus on too long because you can read what's on the screen. But the co-initiated, number one, this is about engaging in deep listening, understanding the different perspectives that present themselves. We need to cultivate trust and openness amongst the group that we're co-initiating with, and stakeholders. It's really important that everybody's on the call to action and the story. And what we need to do here is absolutely identify the common purpose that aligns with the future possibilities. So we need to imagine that. So we need to co-sense, observing without judgment. This is really hard because most of us judge by nature. We have bias, we have judgment, but this is about immersing oneself in the system with engaging with diverse voices, being open to what's being said, maybe not agreeing with it, but accepting there's a different point of view, having an open heart, an open mind, an open will, letting go of preconceived notions and see reality and it is as it is, and bearing in mind that we all sometimes have a different view of what reality is. Then we go into presencing. I find this particularly, for me, particularly, I was very curious about this stage when I wanted to present to the organisation, because this is about connecting to intuition and letting go. And lots of people experience fear here. And why? Because normally there's a let go of ego. There's an ego death that needs to happen. But what this particular stage does is help us create space for reflection. So we practice meditation or silence or deep dialogue with ourselves, mindfulness, for example. And we attempt to let go of ego and fear and past conditioning. So most of us have learned to be a certain way, we're conditioned in a certain way, and we need to almost undo that to tap into the innate inner wisdom that we have, the inner intelligence. And so we need to stay present, and we need to allow new insights to emerge almost organically, naturally. Then we go to co-creating, which is prototyping the future. I call it also visualizing. Prototyping is what Theory U, the technical term, is. But experimenting with prototypes, with new ways, new ideas, hypotheses, and reflect these new insights and adapt quickly based on the real world feedback. This is what we do in research and academia, is we're not testing the reality in the workplace to see how it's literally applied. So this is why it's so important that creating the bridge between these things that I'm talking about today for HR, I think will give them a better chance at getting the business to understand them. But this is where we foster collaboration and learn within teams. And if we learn quickly, it means that we can move to that next stage, which is co-evolving. This is about sustaining systemic change. So we can look at those prototypes, the successful ones, scale them, and put them into broader systems. And remember that we've got systems in systems in systems in organisations. So there's a level of complexity, and that may change, and it will change depending on the organisation. So this is a continuation of refining and integrating innovations into organisational culture. And therefore, we've created and aligned with an ecosystem that we can evolve collectively. So we're now all heading in the same direction at the same speed and time. So the interplay, I'll take a moment here to pause and kind of start bridging some of these, the tools, the resources, platforms, frameworks, whatever you want to think of them as, is you've got a shared process of transformation. All three frameworks and principles, I'll say, emphasize self-awareness, deep listening, and action, guiding individuals from inner growth to external impact through reflection, letting go of ego, and co-creation. So there is a similarity between transpersonal psychology with IDGs and Theory U. But there's also overlap in terms of the framework and the principles, which is Transpersonal psychology explores expanded consciousness beyond the ego, and Theory U provides a structured approach to that systemic change through the deep sensing and presencing. So they sit alongside each other. And all three of these promote mindfulness, empathy, openness to change, and transformational action. And that in turn fosters conscious leadership and innovation in organizations and society. So that's where the interplay and intersectionality of these tools, as I call them, because they're tools for me to achieve what I want to achieve. So I'm going to pause here for a second and ask a question. So what's one professional challenge you face? And maybe this is the prime time, Terry, to stop 15 minutes to even take some questions, if you will. But what's the one professional challenge you face? Because I want us to start thinking practically about what we can do, whatever your role is or your profession, of how you can start using these to help affect change. So I'll pause there for a second. Now I'm going to look over here because I can see the mirror, not the mirror, the Ray. Hi, Ray. How are you doing?
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much, my word. Did you pause for breath there?
Please, I know.
Have you calmed down?
It's a lot, isn't it? Woo!
That is a lot. That is a lot. Bless you for yes. You certainly imparted a serious amount of information. Yeah. Okay. Well, I thought, as it seemed, it might be quite quiet in response to your invitation. I think in my career, and it's a couple of years since I was in large scale change in organizations, but in my career, the single biggest thing that I've experienced around what you're saying in terms of the adoption of change is that, and Dave Snowden talks about this often, is that the culture and the history of organizations is very much oriented towards planning and budgeting big end goal change. And when you work, as we do now, in complexity with, as you said, 5 generations and the needs of the workplace, my experience of that change and of leadership within that change with the context of those needs is, as Dave points out, horrendous. Because the overriding nature of planning and budgeting and leading takes over from the possibility of things emerging within complexity. You see, when you follow any particular container-led or system working in complexity, you can't know those end goals. You can't know what's going to emerge in those spaces from people when you create generative containers, etc. And what I've experienced, sadly, I have to say, because I've been called to work in many organizations, is that there comes a moment when some of the good things that are arising, when you've switched people back on, they've actually re-engaged. The organization doesn't want to know because it's not in the plan. Yeah. And it was never envisaged in the first place. And this is the real challenge, because you mentioned right at the beginning, and I'll just make one last point about this. The real challenge there, the 4 distinct types of work, Price Waterhouse or whoever they are, it could have been any of the big agencies. The future we create in that way is a narrative fallacy. Because the future is so complex, we will never know. We can only move to the next good possibility, and that's what I see as the challenge.
I think there's some great observations. Ray, thanks very much. I mean, we'll have an ongoing dialogue about this, I'm sure, because we're connected offline from here. I think you're absolutely right. one thing that came to mind as you were talking about, and I'd be curious about anybody else that has any view or opinion, when we started to work agile, so agile got introduced probably maybe 10, 15 years ago into the organization, agile teams. And what we were always taught about being agile was to build, imagine a car being built. Well, first of all, you built a skateboard, and then you kind of tested the skateboard with 2 wheels. Then you put a handlebar on it and you tested it, and then you kind of got more investment and did that. Then you went to put a seat on it and went to a bike, right? So still 2 wheels, but then you tested that it all worked, and then you carried on this iteration of building till you got to a 4-wheeled car. And then that's how the money, it was absolutely a paradigm shift around how budgeting was done, how time was factored into it. And it was very uncomfortable for a lot of organizations. Not many, if that was the era that servant leadership became a thing. That was the time. If you haven't heard what servant leadership is, it's a service-based leader, and its approach, and it's an embodiment of behavior. But that was kind of like the place and space where people got this notion of agile working, and it became, again, out of the hands of budgeting. But we soon moved back to the old model because it wasn't sustainable. So yeah, thank you for your comments. By the way, can you all see my screen still, or can you just see me?
I just stopped the screen share so
Brilliant.
that people could
Fabulous.
see you and each other.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you. That was very helpful. I was very mindful to look into the camera. But yeah, I take on point. Yeah, absolutely, Ray. Does anybody else have a view, or whether it's that question or something else? Maybe somebody else wants to have a say. Did I see somebody take off mic?
Wally put
Yes,
his hand
that
up.
was me.
Oh yes, hello. Hello.
Hi, Zoe. Thank you so much, and Terry as well. Really appreciate this talk, and I'm gonna chat for a little bit, so Zoe, you can have another sip of water.
Thank you. I love it. Thank you so much.
And this is a follow-up to what Ray was saying, which is that so many of the change management models that you featured are cognocentric in nature. And typically the direction will be set, for example, at the top, whether that's board or executive management, and there are various internal organizational processes to assure that the direction or strategy is communicated, that comprehension happens between board, senior management, and line staff, for example, and of course, adherence and compliance, and then finally, performance, right? So that's the secret, and change management is seen to occur in and amidst all of that. And at the same time, many of the scenarios that you pointed to at the start require that individuals and society at all different scales confront uncertainty, as you just said, and perhaps also with a renewed sense of care for people, planet, and profit. And it's in the combination of the need to confront uncertainty, perhaps with care and compassion, where there's real challenge, I would say, and perhaps also a lack of training and cultivation in getting comfortable with not knowing, and perhaps the willingness to experiment with what might be emerging. So in other words, how might organizations writ large learn to cultivate as well as motivate or incentivize and enable, right? Not knowing in the spirit of doing something new for the first time and getting energized by it, because that is the only way forward to a better world where people, planet, and the profit are all mutually supporting, mutually augmenting. So I wanted to share that. And that's been one of the challenges that I've had working in the space where I have. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And there's a couple of things that I wanted to pick up on there, is that Leadership is a really difficult place to sit these days, because not only are you an employee, you're also expected to lead employees, regardless of your own view, regardless of your own perspective, your inner compass. And if your values aren't aligned with the organisation, they're really tested at this moment, when you are, you know, needing to convey or to help that transformation. So leadership is a really delicate place to sit. And going back to people, profit and planet, when profit is under massive scrutiny, in my view and experience, as lived experience, the budget that gets dropped is learning and development. The budget that gets dropped is around people-centric tools and resources, because it's the easiest, as well as salaries and benefits. So they're the easiest to trim down almost overnight. Depends where you are in the world, of course, to what overnight means. And of course, where does that leave us? In this deficit of helping people to move, because we need to invest in leaders to adopt these mindsets, these paradigm shifts, using these frameworks, so that they can lead themselves first, self-leadership, and then able to lead others. So it kind of is self-fulfilling. So I'm totally, you know, resonant with what you said, Wally. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else before we carry on? We've got a little way to go, because we're going to shift into, I'm going to reshare my screen, so just give me a second. And thank you, Jessica, for doing that. Thank you for responding to
There is somebody else, Zoe.
Wendy has
I
her
can't
hand up.
see.
Yeah.
Sorry, Wendy, didn't mean to exclude you. Hello.
Sorry, Wendy, for calling you somebody else.
No problem. Thank you so much, Zoe. I actually posted something in the chat window.
Yep.
My response to your question, and that is very straightforward. Also following up and connecting to what you've just mentioned about overnight changes. And we have experienced that in South Africa in particular. And not only once, but quite a few times. So firstly, you can, I'm not going to go into great detail here, you can read afterwards, but it's basically my first response to that question is to be and to remain becoming purposeful in life, because I believe in continuous professional development. And also to be able to contribute in a significant way, because we can keep ourselves busy, but that is not the purpose, to be purposefully busy and to contribute in a way that adds to the value of life, not only for oneself, but also the people who inhabit your immediate environment, and also wider than that. And then secondly, an issue that I'm struggling with at this time of the year, and I have not expected it to happen so soon, is to allow myself creative me time. It's like overwhelming. Many things that have been started last year, like networking, comes together like now, and it's as if everything is landing at the same time. So leadership in that sense of taking management of your own time very seriously, that is a very important part that I wish to get right, to manage properly. Thank you so much for your very insightful talk. I'm looking forward to hearing more.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for sharing that. I felt that very sort of heart-led, and you've just beautifully reminded me that no matter what happens in my life, so for a very personal perspective, my only job is to be in alignment with my higher self and to allow myself creative expression. And creative, the word itself, can be interpreted in so many different ways. But the point is that you connect with that for yourself. And in my first year at Aleph Trust, we had to do what is called an LIP, a learning integrated practice. And this will be a lifelong thing for me, a lifelong particular thing, because it draws into the human dimensions of interconnectedness, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional components, where we need to work on all of these simultaneously so that we mature fully as a whole person. And you've just sort of reminded me, and that's one of the things that I worked on in the case study that I'm about to share with you. So as a lovely reminder for me, and maybe for others, is our job is to manage ourselves, to know ourselves really well, to come into alignment with who we are. And then we remember what's really important, right? So regardless of organisational behaviour, but thank you, I appreciate that very much. Okay, so I'm going to reshare my screen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Give me 1 second. So thank you for sharing, for those of you that have, and there's still opportunity at the end in our Q&A. So I'm going to now deep dive into a case study. And this case study is, so I'm going to navigate the slide because it's a little bit busy, but this is real life. And this is a fast growing SaaS tech platform, cloud-based, membership driven, and enterprise resource planning tool, ERP, for those of you that are familiar with that terminology. They provide an ERP infrastructure based on membership. So they had a goal, and this is a 13-year-old SaaS tech company, so they're not particularly young. They've had enormous success and been acquired by a relatively big technology company, and they have quite a steep goal to, talking about people, profit, planet kind of thing, very steep goal in 20% growth, and that's revenue growth year on year, 80% membership renewal rate goal, 40% profitability, and retain key talent. So in a nutshell, so this is broad strokes because I can't tell you who exactly they are. So the reality, what we had though, was that there were minus 6% on that revenue growth against target, 50% membership renewal rate, 20% profitability, and they'd lost some really key talent, which they believed were driving these other the KPIs. So the first call to action was to understand, and this was about diagnostic work. So I broke it into 3 stages, and I wanted to get deep into the organisation. And I will say that they were very embracing of, tell us, what are we doing wrong? What do we need to fix? And I'll say that they were very open, okay? But I started with the leadership and I got some feedback from them. So I met in each of them individually, and they were very quick to tell me, disconnected leadership team, they had an overwhelmed workforce, they were overwhelmed, and the performance was dipping. So without these other KPIs that were telling us that things weren't great, they knew that they weren't. So then we looked at doing customer feedback analysis. So Net Promoter Score, NPS, if anybody's ever worked with it, is a way to almost like advocacy. So that was one point of measure. We did that through survey, NPS. We did it through forums, okay, customer forums. And we also did one-to-one interviews. And then we looked at an internal perspective, which was the employee feedback through survey. I prefer Office Vibe because it is, we wanted to do data which was pulse rather than a one-off. So we run that over 6 months. And we also did forums. We didn't offer the opportunity for one-to-one because we wanted to keep it as anonymized as possible, because people do get very fearful, certainly from an employee perspective. So what we learned on the right-hand side is that, and these are broad strokes, right? So I'm not going into enormous amount of detail because everything is kind of relative to the journey of where they are now. But what we learned, the main points were, is there was a lack of vision and they didn't really understand the purpose. Lots of communication, really poor, lack of listening and understanding, lack of connection, and competing priorities. Customers felt this as well, by the way. This wasn't just, this was the full feedback from all. However, there were some good points, which was optimism and openness to change. I'm now thinking IDGs when I'm kind of looking at this going, oh, optimism, open to change, yeah, there's some seeds there. Highly creative, highly empathic, and learning mindset. So there was a lot of things going on that were really good for them. So we studied this information, and I was leading the project at the time, and it's still ongoing, but they're in a much, I'll tell you where they are today in a moment. But I wanted to say that I didn't sit down with the leadership and tell them about the IDG framework. I didn't tell them about transpersonal principles. I didn't tell them about theory U, because it was pointless. What I needed to do was listen very deeply about what the challenge was. The challenge was lack of growth, renewal rate, it jeopardizes their future, protects the business they had, and their growth wasn't accelerating their profitability, right? So that was a very easy metrics to follow. So what did we do? That's what you're asking. What did we do, Zoe? Well, this is what we did. We got a bit busy. So I'm going to talk through this slide again, because there's a lot on here, and I'll try to go slow to go fast, if you know what I mean. So this is where it gets really exciting for me, and you probably see my cheeks a little bit flushed, because I love the field of HR. I love helping people overcome solutions, and I believe that HR is the place to do that. We're problem solvers. We're not decision makers, we're problem solvers. So what we did is get self first. So thinking about IDGs, transpersonal principles, theory U, we're looking at ourselves first. One-to-one journey with myself. We had to look at self-awareness, and we had to cultivate that learning mindset. We knew that there was openness to do that, right? Because we'd already seen that from the results. So we needed to get more creative in terms of thinking about how we bring out each of it. So somebody in different disciplines, from finance to commercial to HR to customer relations, all have different temperature points of what creative expression means to them. But what we did was we embedded things like when we started leadership meetings and strategy meetings, we would start opening to say one word: feeling. How do I feel today? One word, so that we all understood where everybody was coming from. So in the same way that Terry was like, let's all smile at each other, let's arrive. We started to do this, and what that did was start to transform the group, right? So we'll talk about the group component in a moment, but these things were starting to do it with self. So how do I get ready when I go into these meetings, which are highly impactful? There's a lot of pace and speed. How am I leading myself with empathy and compassion? And when I've got it wrong, how am I kind with myself? And we built in time for reflection. And I put in a very small change and asked them to not work past 7 in the evening or before 7 in the morning. No emails, no communication, no weekends. So these types of things were about discipline, self-awareness, and managing the discomfort of this, you know, because the results had told us that there was, you know, overwhelming burden, right? So communication with self, outwardly, and the courage, working on courage to express self, to say what we need, to be mindful about how we are in that moment. Because again, I'll go back to the leader versus employee. We're all employees, and for some of us, it's a privilege to lead, a privilege to be a leader. So we had to start with that self-inquiry, deep inner learning about ourselves, and that was very confrontational for some people. Very key in we did 360 feedback, so there was lots of tests and measures, tests in the sense of, am I on the right path? And we did some surveys and metrics, all sorts of things to help unravel, unpack, and show up our strengths, our development areas, etc. So that's what we did on a one-to-one level. Now, after 6 months of doing this, so we've now been collecting data on the other things that I mentioned about from the employees, etc. So we were still learning, right? So the airplane's taken off and we're still building as we go. So we're not looking for perfection. We wanted to make quick change. And this was over 18-month periods. This isn't particularly fast, but in an organizational construct, it is fast. But what we did is look at a team leadership development program. So we took the principles of servant leadership, which is completely underpinned with the qualities that we see in the IDG framework and transpersonal principles. And we started to build trust, to listen deeply, to be of service to each other, to demonstrate that courage, to model humility, to be kind to each other, to have empathy and compassion and space for each other, and hold each other to account, and be persistent when things weren't going brilliantly. They just had this innate trust because they worked on themselves to kind of be, I'm the sum of these parts, this group, this team, and I'm going to know that that we'll reach this kind of unified and unity stage at some point, which they did. They had trust and faith. Now, interestingly enough, the next phase was around team development. So this team organically and naturally asked to do a program which they could lead, design and lead for the rest of the organization. I've never experienced this in my nearly 3 decades of HR. I've never had a leadership team beg me to say, could we use what we've learned and deploy it to all of our employees in like a simple, easy way? Sure, off you go. I've never seen that kind of engagement. And so what that did was also preserve cost, because there was no external creation. I didn't need to do anything. I've already done the work with them at the front. They now created a program designed and delivered by the leaders using the IDG framework. Much later in the journey, so I explained to them the framework we'll use and the principles we're going to apply and the theory you all into play. So we're also going to use the Lewin model, which is unfreeze, learn, freeze, but we're going to pepper this in and weave in all of these tools for it to be enriched. So what happened 18 months into the journey? There's an alignment of purpose, mission, vision, and values. There is regular, consistent communication cadence. There's an alignment of priorities and goals, high engagement and creativity, decrease in sickness and wellbeing issues, increased collaboration, much faster results, and active listening. And what's that equated to in metrics, KPIs? 15% growth or thereabouts, I've rounded it up, 30% profitability, 75% renewal rate, and now we've locked in key talent, because not because they've got retention bonus, but because they see themselves in this organisation and see the opportunity and want to grow. To me, that's phenomenal. I haven't seen this in a very long time, if at all. I've seen it in pockets, but not throughout my time. So that begs me to think about a really practical approach, because this organisation, that was built for them, and that approach was done for them. And this is not a product that you pluck off the shelf. It's interwoven an intersectionality between the framework, the principles, the model that helps us to navigate this particular company. But by using these tools, I really do believe that they can be used in whether it's teams at this moment in time or organisations. But remember, the bigger the organisations, the more you've got teams in teams and teams and systems in systems and systems, it takes longer. And so therefore we have to influence at a much more senior level in the organisation to get that kind of buy-in, to get that practical. And yes, they do want to know how much it costs, and yes, they do want to know the time, but we can be a lot more practical with the tools that we've got, and be smart with them, because they're available to everybody right now. So the main message here is one size really doesn't fit all, and what worked for this company, there'll be complexities and differences depending on the organisation. So the key kind of takeaways, that I haven't necessarily used these language before in this presentation or this webinar, but I'm going to go there because I think I haven't mentioned diversity, equity and inclusion for a reason. I believe that if you have a balanced leadership, and when we talk about balanced, I'm going to talk about energy for a moment. I'm thinking about inclusive leaders having 2 types of energy. I'm talking about the being and acting. Being is a more feminine, nothing to do with gender, everything to do with energy, and acting is a much more masculine energy. And what, going back to the leadership, the leaders, the one-to-one learning in the case study that I just presented, they worked very hard on being able to push and pull, using the being and using the acting, regardless of their gender, regardless of their role and their level and their seniority in the company. Everyone got to work on being a balanced leader, knowing when to push and pull the energy, these states, from a non-egoic perspective. So if we have balanced leadership and we drive a balanced and inclusive culture, we don't necessarily need a diversity strategy. That's my view, and that may be open to challenge, I'm sure. I've got best friends that are leading DEI for Salesforce, for example, may not necessarily agree with me, but that's what I see from my perspective. When we talk about collaborative goal methodology, If anybody is familiar with objective key results, also known as OKRs, it's not a new methodology, it's been around quite some time. But what this does is essentially it works at a very high, the highest level of authority will dictate what these goals will be. So there might be 5 or 6 of them, and they're cascaded in their original form completely through the organization, whatever the style of organization, Helix, matrix, hierarchical, doesn't matter. They're put through the organization, and everybody gets a chance to put in their contribution towards these goals. I'm making it sound very simplistic, by the way. It's not a simple thing to structure, but once you've got it in place, it's very transparent, and everybody understands that they're all working towards the same goal, and they're all working at the same speed. There is no competing priorities. But what everyone recognises is their contribution looks different because of their role in the organisation. So then learning and development, where's the opportunity there? Well, if we understand that learning and development is not exclusive to one or a few, but to all, we can start to build in principles around our learning agenda. And even if you have very little budget available, we have breath work. Breath work is available to us without any money. We could do mindfulness and going silent and doing a lot of inner work without costing a lot of money. Yes, we need some guidance and we need help, but we can do some of this in our natural day-to-day. This 1% of action will lead to huge results over time. So in our learning development, we can actually embed certain things. And I mentioned earlier on the one-word check-in for the leadership team has been absolutely transformative in their trust, in being understanding, their compassion and empathy towards each other. And now they have each other's back all the time. They have horizontal loyalty, which is another topic for another day. Hiring criteria. If we look at the framework, now what we don't want is group thinking. We want diversity. We don't need to be hiring everybody like ourselves, but what we do need to do is think about what hiring criteria, and that could be values-based if your company is embodying and living by those values, I might add, which is not always the case. But if we look at the principles, the framework particularly, we can see and we can distill some of those criteria and put them in our hiring practice. Bearing in mind that we are in a bit of a talent war these days, so people are looking for connection, connectedness, and a sense of belonging and inclusion. So for me, the marriage of all of these gives you the recipe for people to see, I want to work for them because they embody, and actually, the case study I was presenting earlier on had a talent problem, but we did a campaign around work-life balance because that's one of the biggest things. They don't work beyond, they work between 9 and 6, absolute maximum, Monday to Friday, flexible working. It's working because people want to come and work for this organisation. They're not the best payers, by the way. So that just shows you people want a lifestyle that they can embrace and have a life outside of work.
Yeah.
So there was a question. Yeah.
Yeah, just keeping an eye on time. It's coming up to 8:45. Just to ensure we have a bit more Q&A.
Oh yeah, right. So I'm going
minutes
to wrap up quickly. Yeah, thank you for the time. Thank you, Terry. I told you I could talk for England. So what we need to do is shift to that human-centered workplace. And Wally, you were talking about this earlier on, the performance, the evaluation, the limited adaptability. You talked about it, so thank you. We need to move away from that, and we need to embrace a more human-centered HR, purpose-driven, participatory, and empathetic, change-ready. So we know that's what this whole webinar's been around, really. So moving away from the brain and getting into the heart. So what to remember, key takeaways. Transpersonal psychology principles, there's more than I explored, right? So there'll be other principles and knowledge that you can learn. Aleph is a great place to learn from. The IDG framework, so you've got the website which has a downloadable framework. Theory U, available to you all, and change model, and I'm happy to provide these should you want me to. I know that you'll get these slides, but these are the kind of what, when, how, and why all wrapped together. And then we just need to really understand the diagnostic of the organisation and then apply these and weave these that then make sense for the organisation. And I really am coming to the end of, so nice shout out, Terry. So change isn't about adapting, it's about evolving with intention, having intention. And that's very much about transpersonal consciousness. Living with intent is also a game changer. So I'll leave you with that thought. And just one very last thing is, if anything's resonated with you and you want to dialogue with me, here's my LinkedIn profile. You can also take my email should you want to, and I can explain more, maybe consider working together. But that will be in this deck anyway. So without further ado, let's move into juicy Q&A. And I'll stop, shall I stop sharing so I can see people?
Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So much to take on board there. So much information. Thank you. Yeah. So the floor's open. Any questions or comments? Yeah, Scott.
Scott.
Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to see you all. Hi Zoe. So just going back to the question that you talked about in terms of one of the big problems or challenges I face, and maybe just also in the context of your most previous presentation. You know, for me, I don't move at the kind of the more senior end. I move more the kind of the middle to upper end of management, or actually my role is more kind of subject matter expertise, but I have a leadership role to some extent. And I guess what I see in terms of me being a bit of a change maker, you know, I lead yoga sessions, I lead mindfulness sessions, I lead well-being sessions, a little bit different in a lot of respects. And a lot of people know about these things, that they're all good, yet the take-up is very low, if I'm honest to say. Like I've got some committed people who come every week and they love it for different reasons, or many reasons, shall I say. And senior management know about the importance, and they love to talk about, you know, mental health and mindfulness, and maybe to a lesser extent yoga and so forth. But actually, there's so much cheap talk in organizations, so much well-being washing, greenwashing, whatever washing. And to some extent, overcoming that dissonance bias or skepticism, or even just like, I'm too busy.
Common one.
Like I had a coffee with a colleague today who came to my classes, and it's like he can only come if he has the time. And I was saying to him, this is the paradox, is like yoga is so great for stress management, but unless you feel comfortable enough to go to a yoga class, you're not going to enjoy the experience. And it seems to me this is a real difficulty that I have right now. It's because I know these practices are so good, yet getting people to come and convince them to overcome their own dissonance and skepticism is a real challenge. And maybe it's more for like senior leaders, maybe for the Generation Z and coming through, it's maybe a little bit more different. But to me, change, as you know, starts at the top with the mindset and systems theory and so forth. And the people who have the power to change things, yet they're the ones who are really not really affecting the change. They're not role modeling. They're talking the talk. And how do we really overcome that?
That is a big quandary. And I will say that most leaders that I see do this, like others can change, I haven't got time. They don't realize that the change has to start with them. And this is probably very prevalent in generations X and Y. I'm going to generalize here, right? So because change is much more difficult when you're more seasoned. Now, the other thing that I will say, did we lose Scott? Oh no, where's Scott gone? I can't see. Oh, there you are. So you moved around the page and I was like, oh, that just changed. So I can look to you there. Also, you know, there was something that I'm a bit cheeky. So I know that I've got a cheekiness to me and I get away with it magnificently sometimes, or not, in the workplace. And people that generally work with me know that there's this kind of fun side of me. So I make people get their screen time up on the phone. And when they see them at 15 hours or whatever it is, or you can't see at the moment, like 15 hours and 58 minutes, because I work on my phone an awful lot, I say to them, you don't have time, stop scrolling. You can prioritize any time you want. Look here, you've got time. So, I mean, I'm a bit cheeky and I kind of like, that's my personality, but I see it's a real challenge. And I'm going to open up to the floor for other people to say how, you know, you might overcome that. I think, Ray, did you want to respond? Because maybe you've got some thoughts.
I
on that as
do
well.
want to respond.
Yes.
You're right. I love your description, Scott. It's what people often refer to as business theatre. We've all been there. We're all busy being busy. The business theatre, and sadly, I think just to speak somewhat to your point about mindset, because we often talk about mindsets. Somebody much more wise than me said, "We are what we do." And in fact, you know, you can talk all you want about conceptual change, but it's built up of micro practices. We are what we do every day, every minute. So it's bringing micro practices that will start that. And Zoe, you mentioned that in saying, you know, you bring micro practices that perhaps, I mean, the IDGs don't prescribe micro practices, but they do prescribe dimensions and pillars, etc. But bringing those practices, well done you, by the way, because that in itself is difficult, because it's literally like fold your hands the other way. People don't want to do it, but in doing it, then we change who we are by what we do. And the way I'd like to describe that is, as leaders and as people in organizations, then instead of the business theater, we move into having presence and being present for people. And that actually brings so much more time, takes away all the scrolling and all of the stories that we're running that stop us from doing things. So that's wonderful. And then I come to my question, because you must have noticed this at some point, because I'm stitching in now the U theory, and for everybody here, because when you put those people into a room, when you start to create that container based on U theory, at some point, once people have started to take on those practices, once people have started to actually see a bigger shared purpose, they go through what is called inversion. So they give up all their little fallacies and the stories they've been running and the individual concerns that they have to the greater good and something bigger. And this has been documented over and over and over again. This is the human experience. This is how we are as humans, because we are all connected in ways, until we reach that point, we simply don't understand. And we don't even need to understand. So my question after seeing all of that, Zoe, is, was there a moment in that leadership container when the field changed, or you felt something slip, go away, and you thought, ha, we've got something here? And can you describe that?
Yes, and I know exactly. I have the chills as you're saying that, so that's always a confirmation for me. The kind of tingles and I know I'm always it's a very live topic for me, and I run the risk of getting a bit emotional about it, because it was a very heartfelt moment, and it was so first of all, everyone had to go through that one-to-one level of deep inquiry, and that in itself brought that introspection. It brought a lot of shifts. It brought a lot of, I'd say, even shame to the surface, and guilt. So there was some supplementary help that was required for some people, because they were carrying trauma and burdens from, it wasn't really anything to do with work, but it showed up at work. So that was letting go and realizing that there was these mini ego deaths, as I like to say. They don't sound particularly great, and then usually not, in my experience anyway. So after these and these are all separate, so they're all hidden, right? They're not necessarily aired out to each other. I knew what was going on, but there was one particular moment where we were going into the realization that they wanted. There was two moments. One was when they really connected as a team. Now, you can look at the Tuckman model, which is a storming, norming, performing, and that's kind of a bit old-fashioned, but the principles of it still apply. And they realised that they'd actually learned to trust each other, and that there was moments where a huge emotion came to the surface for all of them, and they all had tears, all of them, and they all just let go, and they hugged. And they were like there for each other, and I just left them to it, right? Give them contained space. I was a bit choked up, but I kind of let it go. And that was the moment the barriers completely dropped. And then this field of possibility emerged, as in, that was the excitement. How do we get this to the team? How can we be the teachers and bring them on the journey? How can we, because it's wonderful. And even though it was confronted, they not forgotten, but they'd released the kind of, let's say, painful moments. And then they embraced the possibilities of, we're a really high performing team, and look what we've done in 18 months. There was a lot of celebration. And then that's the second moment when they kind of was like this burst of energy of, we must create something for the rest of the organization. They didn't need me anymore at this point, because they're already self-serving. They've already gone into this action orientation, and I just need to do check-ins with them. So it was a great question to ask, and thank you. And one that brings back a little emotion for me, because it was a moment where I saw and felt this absolute let go. That's the only thing, a surrender.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And these were, I dare say, privileged white male middle-aged men, right? So I'm going to categorize them because it was a fact. Very stiff upper lip, and didn't really understand and embrace the different dimensions of energy, so the push and the pull. But it was a really, really nice moment. So thank you for asking.
I just want to say to you that you mentioned the word trauma there, and somebody like Thomas Hubel would talk very much about needing framework and architecting frameworks to actually allow trauma to surface and to be processed. And I think that's super work that you did there.
Yeah.
And you know what? I didn't know what it was going to do. That's why this case study for me has been so profound, because people trusted me and looked at me and said, we'll go whatever you say, we'll do it. But they've been on the journey also with me, going through my masters, and they've seen and heard me grow and experience, and I'm imparting with them, eager to tell them, not necessarily about the frameworks, but they've seen. So they invited me to participate, knowing that I've been on a journey. So I think there was some prerequisite there, and that would need to, that trust and rapport need to happen with whoever I work with next, and that's going to be important, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jessica, for that in there. Yes.
Yeah, I see we're coming up to time now.
Yes.
But we'll just take one more question then from Wally. But I know we could talk all night like this. I really know that. So, but yeah, we'll have one more question and then we'll have to close, unfortunately. So, Wally, over to you.
Thank you so very much. And I'll make it quick. And perhaps this is also more of an observation and certainly a note of gratitude and appreciation to you, Zoe and Scott, for the work that you do with really large companies. And what came up for me, one of the insights is how wouldn't it be wonderful if there could be interventions outside of these organizations, perhaps socially, culturally, that then prevented the need for you, Zoe and Scott, to come in when you needed to intervene at a very critical point in human or personal or organizational development. And wouldn't it be great for a cultural shift to happen, which would also then allow for you, Zoe and Scott, to do what you do, but perhaps to help individuals and organizations cultivate more complex skills, right? So it's an appreciation of everything that you've done, and I'm also wondering about the kinds of social and cultural conditions that would enable and support you to do more of what you do in a way that's even more that's even richer and more enriching. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Wally. So in very quick response to that is, I do believe there's a lot of work that can be done at education. I fundamentally believe the education system, certainly here in the UK, is very behind and it's very old fashioned. It's built for a world that no longer exists. So I think there's an awful lot to do, and I think that we can work. I would personally like to work with more change makers in the education system rather than big corporates. I'm at the place in my life where money is not the biggest thing, right? It's a practicality, but it's about making and helping the visibility to attract the right people, not dragging anyone, not convincing them, but kind of allowing them to adopt. And because for me, that's a part of principle of attract the energy, you know, the same what Ray was saying, you become the things that you do that you are. And to me, that's a big part of helping people to self-master so they can apply change. So there needs to be more of us, and the Transformation Hub is a portal for that, as well as these resources. They're resources. So the more we can have visibility, have platforms to talk about it like this, we can make change more effective. But it is not one-to-one, it's one-to-many. And that's what it's going to need and take to be more transformative or get a message out much quicker. But thank you for your observation. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for giving me the space to be able to talk about what is a very passionate topic for me. Thank you. Over to you, Terry.
Oh, thank you, Zoe, and thank you for sharing your experience and your expertise and knowledge, but sharing such a profound case study, as Ray said, you know, is really deep and meaningful. And for bringing your whole self to that as well. So, you know, we could see that your work is really important to you, because you're just getting choked up when Ray asked you about that transition point as well. And thank you for your enthusiasm as well. It's very contagious. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for letting me be here. I appreciate it. And thank you all for engaging and being here and spending your valuable time here.
Yeah, and I echo that. And thank you to all of you for being here and engaging in the dialogue. And I think each time we learn so much from each other in that dialogue. And I think it's a real important part of this hub. So thank you to you all. And hope to see you all again at the next webinar, which is going to be on the 8th of April. And our guest speaker will be Daniela Pappy-Thornton, and she's going to be talking about systems leadership. So you can go onto the website, you know where it is, and register there. And also as a reminder, you know, I'm sure you probably all are, but you can follow our LinkedIn page as well, the LF Transforming Organisations page as well. So there'll be details on there. So look forward to seeing you all next time on the 8th of April, normal time, 7:30. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Yeah, we can unmute and say goodbye, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. And if anyone wants to
Bye.
connect, remember, happy to.
Thank
And maybe,
you.
Scott, we should connect as well, you know, all of us. Let's carry on the dialogue and see how we can change the world.
Indeed. Great, Zoe. Cheers, everyone.
Indeed.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good evening.